So, what would constitute superhuman intelligence?
Very diplomatically asked. The slightly more pointed version of that question is, how can you talk about this at all, since we don't even know what intelligence is? There is, even though we don't know what intelligence is, the word in English is a useful word. We use it in many different ways, but there are places where it's useful to use. What superhuman intelligence would be like, actually, I could retreat behind what I was saying about the unknowability of the singularity, to completely cover myself, but slightly more forthcoming. I could say there is a form that I call weak superhumanity that you could say very concretely, and that is, imagine that you could make a device that could fool you as to its humanity. You only talk to it on a telephone, or you only talk to it by email. And I think if there were such a device, and if you worked with it for years, and you didn't know that it was a machine, so you worked with it for years, a colleague on your own projects, let's say, was on the West Coast, and really developed a normal collegial or colleague type relationship with that thing, that it's fair to say that that's a person. That's a human level intelligence. Now, if it is a machine, but it had that characteristic, you could say, well, what would happen if, unlike with humans, what if you could, with this device, do the same thing you can do with PCs, and that is run the internal clock rate faster, or run it on a faster computer, so it can basically think faster. And suppose you could make it think 1,000 or 1,000,000 times faster than a human. Now, is that superhuman? Well, if it said, suppose it had a college degree, you could ask it questions, and if it were willing to cooperate, it could go off and give you answers. Like you could say, I would like to know how to solve this problem about human relations or chemistry or something like that, and it might come back in 30 or 40 seconds with the answer. In other words, it's solving human-type problems at superhuman speeds. If you accept the biggest, to me, the biggest thing that's unlikely about that whole idea is the original of having a machine that would be a person. But if you buy that, it's easy to imagine what I call weak superhumanity. Now, the reason I call it weak superhumanity is that suppose you had a machine that could be a dog. It's only as smart as a dog, but it really is as smart as a dog. What happens if you run it 1,000,000 times faster? I really suspect that although it's smarter than it's weakly super doggish, because it can solve doggy type problems very fast, and so it would arguably not. It would never be somebody you could have a conversation with. In the same sense, then, and this is actually going back to your original question, it's not at all surprising that, although I gave you an example of superhuman intelligence, that what is really going on would not be necessarily be very human-like at all. If you were talking to one, and it wanted to convince you that it was human-like, it could do it, because it would have you totally pegged. It could play you like a fiddle, and you would never even. Well, if you knew it was a superhuman, you would suspect that you were being. There was Ken MacLeod is a science fiction writer in the UK, and he had a situation where they were in a warfare situation, and the other side was being run by a superhumanly intelligent military AI. And it wasn't a horror story, but it was scary, because throughout the story they're being, as I recall, being outmaneuvered and outgunned, just out Napoleonified by this other side, because it was just so smart. And then for some reason, they actually actually have a telephone conversation with this. For some reason, it sees an advantage to having a telephone conversation, a video phone conversation, and so it comes across. It looks like a person on the screen, but it's just the game it's playing is it's winning the war just by talking at you. And there are humans, you know, Hitler had the reputation of being extremely persuasive in person. There are people who are just extremely, and this guy, this author just did such a terrific job with that, because this conversation that is just so intimidating. He was talking to the hero of the novel, who was a very competent woman, but every little thing about body language and voice language, he just had her totally figured out, and she knew it, and there was sort of this feedback when you know you're dealing with somebody who really is ahead of you. But all of that was just, you could imagine that all of that to this superhuman critter was just another mechanism of dealing with the outside world. So what I can see that superhuman intelligence, first of all, it's not just one thing. It's probably a hierarchy of things, and the stuff at the high end is very strange, and probably the only way to recognize it is its extreme competence in whatever it seems to be doing.
Okay, so a less diplomatic